Hi, welcome to today's segment of Our Ventura TV. My name is George Alger. Today we're going to be talking about the Citizens Journal, and our guest expert today is George Miller, who is the publisher and co-founder of the Citizens Journal. Welcome, George.
Good morning, George. Thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. Love your past episodes.
Oh, thanks. I think this is the first time we've ever done a George and George show, so let's see if we can keep that straight. Yeah. So first of all, let's start out with the most fundamental question. What is the Citizens Journal?
Citizens Journal is an online newspaper offering regional news, commentary, announcements, politics, opinion, almost everything that a full-service newspaper has, we're trying to fill in. We don't have a sports section yet. We're not running obituaries, but we have a lot of the basics already in place.
Good. So, you know, we have certainly a variety of printed local papers. I mean, how does an online version fit into that?
Good question. Well, first of all, most of the local papers are going online. In our view, when we went to start Citizens Journal, we thought of making it a print publication originally, but the printing and distribution costs are enormous, and it just doesn't make sense anymore. For us to start out on a small scale, how would we distribute our newspaper to our 20,000 readers scattered around Ventura County, LA County, and even points east like Ohio? It's just too expensive to do. It's basically, that model is a dinosaur in today's economy. So starting out that way would be suicidal. The existing publications have the momentum already. They have the advertising base, the distribution system, but we didn't see that we could sustain it. It would take us too long to build up to the level that we're at now.
Good.
It was a business decision.
Totally understood. So how does the Citizens Journal sort of differentiate itself from the other papers?
Well, it's a very good question. You know, I've spent the last 6 years of my life, and to do a Me Too would be a waste of my time. I went into retirement and I was dissatisfied with the existing media. Not that they're all bad, but I saw big gaps in how they covered the news and the viewpoint. And what's unique about us is we have something closer to the citizen's viewpoint. Many of our articles are actually written by citizens who are not professional journalists. That's a two-edged sword. There's some advantages and disadvantages to that. Obviously, we have to do more editing and more screening than we would if we were working with all professional journalists. But we also train people. Citizens Journal was co-founded by Michael Hernandez, who's a former journalist who has run newspapers, been a reporter, been an operations manager. He taught us the basics of journalism, and we teach a class every year. And we graduated 17 students last year, some of whom are working for us now.
Good. Would you say this is also an opportunity to invite people to participate if they want to?
We are always looking for volunteers. It's very hard to find people who have both the ability, the desire, and the time to do that. So we have a high fallout rate because life happens to people. They have jobs and other commitments, they need money, and we're an all-volunteer organization. We use only an occasional stringer to fill in things that our volunteers are not available to do. So yes, please volunteer. Citizensjournal.us. Go online. There's all you need to get in touch with us to help and volunteer.
Good. In fact, since it is volunteer run, I mean, is it a nonprofit?
Technically, no. We're actually an LLC, and there's a reason that we did that. When we started up, we looked at 501 status as opposed to LLC. Running as an independent business makes you less subject to government surveillance and regulation. We have friends in different NGOs that had amazing interference from the government, demanding certain information, not granting them their nonprofit status. So we said, you know, we'll just bypass all that. We'll just act like a business which just happens to break even every year within 1,000 plus or minus.
Good. Okay, so for someone who hasn't had a chance to visit the Citizens Journal website yet, what might you say is some prominent features they should definitely spend a few moments looking at?
Okay, the prominent feature is much easier to navigate than any other newspaper in Ventura County. If you go online, I won't mention any publications, you typically can only find the current stuff and a couple of days back, but we make it easier to find stuff by topic and to go as far back as you want. And our front page, some people say, is a little busy, but that enables you to have that kind of visibility that you don't see on the other sites. And we also have quite a few portals for accessing it. Most of our content is on a website called citizensjournal.us, but you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, Life USA, Minds.com, and we also have an email edition too, which is useful because many times if, let's say you're on Facebook, Facebook only sends our notifications out to about 2 or 3% of our readers.
Right.
So out of 20,000 people, maybe only a few hundred get the notifications. If you get our email bulletins, you get everything. So it gives you better contact and with us than the other means of looking at it. Some people just put our URL on their favorites list, and they just consult it every day. What we found is people tend to be overwhelmed by news sources, and they'll forget about it if we don't remind them occasionally, which we call that a push system as opposed to a pull system, where we rely upon the reader to come and find us.
Good, totally understood. Some online publications actually charge for people to view their content. Is that pertinent?
That's a really good question. When we started, we said, well, we're going to charge people $1 a week. That sounds fair, right? Well, you know what we found is that people don't want to pay for an online newspaper that they've never heard of before. So we said, okay, we're going to have to change the business model greatly. First of all, we're not printing it anymore, and secondly, we're not going to charge for it, and we get our money to operate through donations and advertisements. Currently, about 80% of our budget comes from donations, and only 20% from advertisements.
And I guess these donors they just like the paper because it's not tax deductible.
It's not tax deductible, you're right. However, if you take an ad, that's tax deductible. So a smart donor will say, well, I'll just take an ad out. What's your most expensive ad, right? And that's a good way for them to write it off as a business expense and for us to receive the revenue as well.
Okay. So it's not like it's tax deductible as a donation, as a nonprofit. It's just simply a business expense.
That's correct. It's a business expense.
Okay, cool. So now, in terms of let's just say the heart of the paper, is there any focus? I know you cover a lot of topics, but would you say that there's something that is so unique to the Citizen Journal that they just couldn't find it anywhere?
Well, there's certain things you can find out. We'll do more in-depth analysis than most of the other newspapers, right? And one thing that's quite a bit missing from the Ventura County papers is a different stance of political views as well. So we try to fill in the missing thing that's not available there and provide things you just would not see in a local newspaper at all.
Could you give an example?
Right now, what's going on with the new administration, virtually all of the other publications in town are very much opposed to the current administration, and we're not. So that's a huge difference right there. So that's useful to both people that want to see that viewpoint and also the people like me that like to see multiple viewpoints. I read about 10 different newspapers regularly, not every day, but for example, I read the LA Times every week on Sunday without fail, so I can find out different viewpoints. I'll also look at, for example, foreign newspapers as well. I'll look at the China Times of News, or whatever it is. I'll look at the Daily Mail in Great Britain. They have a very different viewpoint than what we do have. And there's some things we just don't cover in U.S. papers that are covered there. And frequently we'll run that stuff. We also pull things out of the financial press. For example, publications I subscribe to for investing sometimes have very interesting articles that you would not see in a newspaper. So I get their permission and we run them in Citizens Journal. Things about banking, things about monetary things that you just do not see in the local newspapers at all.
Got it. Well, when you bring up the political point, I'm wondering if are you presenting a particular political point of view, or are you trying to
try not to? Problem is the sources we have for political news are very biased on both sides. For example, the Washington Post is very left, the Washington Times is quite right. Both those newspapers are usually pretty factual, but the perspective that they present things from is different. For example, the New York Times might say, well, the right-wing organization of such and such. Well, why is that right-wing, but they never say if someone's left-wing? They do have political, but there's unconscious bias that creeps into the news. We have to avoid that ourselves as well. So I can say that we're pretty factual, but can we say there's no bias? No, we can't. As long as people know what the bias is, that's the important thing to do.
Okay.
Sometimes we'll even say that, the writer belongs to, he's a card-carrying member of the Communist Party or the Nazi Party or whatever. At least people know that. Now some people say, well, why did you run that article? I said, we're not running it because we advocate it, we're running it because it's news. If we state who the person is and what their affiliation is, we leave it up to the intelligence of the reader to decide how to interpret that.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the demographic of the readers that are currently
From what we can tell from Facebook, it's roughly about 1/4 Latino. The average age is about 55 right now. And certain media have different demographics than others. For example, the people on our email list tend to be quite a bit older, white. The people on Facebook tend to be all over the map. The people that come in on some of the new social media like Twitter, just all over the mark. They're all over the country. They're young, they're old, all different political things. I don't even know how to characterize them. But I'd say on the average they tend to be older. And because Ventura County is very diverse, we have a fairly diverse readership. Not as diverse as the demographics, but diverse.
Okay, now do you happen to have any feedback from viewers that might suggest why they go to the Citizens Journal? I mean, is it an additional source, or they truly are finding something that they're...
Well, people will tell us, for example, they're very big on certain things. For example, we're covering the homeless. For months we had Lori Denham, our Ventura reporter, write a whole series on homelessness and related crime and things like that. We got tremendous response to that, much higher readership. When we covered the fire last year, our circulation tripled during that period. I hate to say it, but if it bleeds, it leads. People love to see that news. In spite of the fact that we think some things are really important for readers, the biggest readership are things that have to do with crime, children, and pets, in that order. I hate to say it, but that's what people are actually reading in our newspaper the most. So we run what we think is an important announcement, let's say in Ventura, something to do with the water or something like that, and 500 people will read it. Then we run something about a murder on the boardwalk, and 10,000 people read it. What can I say? That's just how people are.
Okay.
But we use that to bring people in and then show them what else we have to offer.
Okay. Is the coverage entirely Ventura County, or do you go outside of Ventura County?
Well, we will run news outside of Ventura County if we think it has a significant effect on the lives of people here, which is why we cover international news and national news as well, and of course state news. The state has an enormous effect on things here because all the city governments have to follow state law in everything that they do. So some people say politics is local. If you're talking about something like housing, the state tells you where you can build the housing units, how you can build the housing units, how much low income, how much upper income you can do. So the cities don't have that much discretion. So we have to cover that. Even though politics is supposedly local, a lot of that's dictated by forces outside of us.
Got it. George, we're out of time already.
Okay.
So before we end off, I wonder if you could repeat the website one more time. And is there a summating message you'd like to convey to the viewers?
Okay, yeah. Again, we're on citizensjournal.us on the web. You can find us on those other social media platforms I talked to. You can contact me directly at publisher@citizensjournal.us. So what did we spend the last 6 years of our life doing? Trying to develop an alternative news source for Ventura County that you can come to. We encourage you to write for us as well as donate to us. Just contact us, editor@citizensjournal.us. And thank you so much for having me on today, George.
Great to have you, George. This is George Alger signing off for this segment of Our Ventura TV. Until we meet again.